Hi guys, this video is going to show you how to set your aperture and aperture priority, your shutter and shutter priority, pop up your flash, and how to use exposure compensation. So you'll be ready for the workshop later this month. So take a quick look at it, make sure you have your camera with you, practice these things so we won't have to do this at the workshop. We can start shooting right away. We'll see you there. So to set your aperture and shutter, you go to your mode dial here and you see the letters there. M is manual, AV is aperture, which is A on a Nikon, TV is shutter, which is S on a Nikon. If you look at the screen on the back and you have this screen turned on to show shooting mode, you'll see right here that the modes will change as you change. So the first thing you do is go to the mode you want to go to. So in this case, it's aperture priority. And then on this camera, which is a Canon, there's a dial right here. And if I turn that dial, you'll see the aperture number change. If I'm in shutter priority, and I turn the same dial up here, it will change the shutter speed. If I'm in manual, and on this particular camera I turn that dial again, and it changes the shutter speed. If I want to change the aperture in manual, I turn this button and it changes the aperture number. On many cameras you only have one dial, which is this one, and you turn this in manual to change one setting. And then there's an AV button back here, a little button with the letters AV. And when you hold that button and turn this dial, you change the other setting. And on Nikons, you have the button back here to turn. This button right here is back here, and the AV button is up here somewhere. If you have a higher-end Nikon, you'll notice that there are two buttons on the Nikon. One back here, which looks like this, and one up here that looks like this. In that case, when you're in manual, you turn one button to change one setting. You turn the other button to change the other setting. Now, when you're setting your aperture or shutter, as I said, you can look at the screen on the back, but normally you're looking actually in your viewfinder. And when you look in your viewfinder, you'll see numbers show up, usually around the bottom of the screen, like that. And that's usually where you're looking when you're trying to set these settings. And the reason is you need to be pointing the camera at whatever it is you're shooting. So if I'm shooting a person, I'm pointing the camera out this way. I tap the shutter, and then I turn the button I need to turn up here to set whatever setting I want. Now on this camera, you can also see the settings up here. A lot of cameras, you cannot see the settings up here. You can only see them in the viewfinder or on the screen in the back of the camera. Now let's talk about exposure compensation. With exposure compensation, you can make the picture lighter or darker. You use exposure compensation when you're in aperture priority or program mode or shutter priority. Some cameras allow you to use it when you're in manual, but that's kind of a misnomer, because when you're in manual and you change either one of these settings right here or the ISO, you are in effect using exposure compensation. In other words, you're making the picture darker or lighter by changing one of these settings when you're in manual. When you're in aperture or shutter priority, when you change one of these settings, in this case it's the aperture, the camera automatically changes the other setting, you see that here, to give you the exact same exposure. The ISO, if it's on auto ISO, which it should not be, will also change if need be to give you the same exposure based on whatever aperture you choose. Or if you're in shutter priority, whatever shutter you choose, the aperture will change. Now exposure compensation is this dial right here. Now on a Nikon, the dial, or a dial that looks similar to this, or I should say the scale, is somewhere on this screen if the screen is set to showing you your shooting mode settings. If you're looking at the inside of the viewfinder like you should be doing, then you'll see that scale somewhere inside the camera's viewfinder. So go in your manual and figure out how to change your exposure compensation by looking up exposure compensation in the index in the back and finding out what buttons you use on the camera to make that happen. Flash compensation. First, to get your flash to turn on or your pop up, there's a button somewhere that has a lightning bolt next to it. You tap it and your flash pops up. Now in some cases you may have to be in your menu somewhere to do that. But in most cases there's a button over here. Every once in a while you'll find a button up here somewhere. It has a lightning bolt on it, and when you tap it, your pop-up flash will pop up like that. When your pop-up flash is popped up, you can do what's called flash exposure compensation or flash compensation, which allows you to make the flash brighter or dimmer. Let's see how to do that. So with flash compensation, it works very similar to exposure compensation. On this camera and on most Canons, there's a button that has a Q on it right here, meaning quick settings. On Nikons and some other cameras, there's a button that has a little lowercase I, or possibly a button that says info. When you hit that button, this screen changes. When I hit the button, it says, in this case, shutter speed. You see shutter speed is highlighted. If I use this toggle on this particular camera, I can move around. I have to hit Q again to get in there. I can move around to various places on this screen to do things. So I'm going to go over here to flash compensation, which is a flash lightning bolt and a plus minus 0. And when I turn this button on top of the camera this time, you'll see that that number changes. So if I push that to plus 2/3 or minus or whatever, that's how brighter the camera will be, the flash will be. That's how brighter the flash will be. Or if I turn it the other way, that's how dimmer the flash will be below or above what the camera determines the flash should be. You'll learn more about that in the workshop. Just know how to get in here and change that number, how to make it show up. On this camera, you hit Q. On some cameras, you hit the I. Lowercase I will be a button like this. It has a lowercase I on it. And when you get into this screen back here, you can navigate around back here, and it's just find flash compensation and change it. You can also change your exposure compensation here. You can change your ISO here. You can change your shutter speed, etc. That's another way to do it.